state, but now we're in the top 5 in the nation. And we hear all this news about the new research happening with the Antarctic ice sheets and the fear that those are melting much faster, and the dynamics of those ice sheets are actually going to add sea level rise in excess of 3.3 feet. So, you know, we keep hearing this kind of sobering news, but I think it, you know, makes me think of 2 things. You know, one is it's a big, big issue that we're going to have to deal with for many, many decades. It also makes me, you know, proud that we in San Mateo County are thinking about it now, and everyone in this room is done a lot of work on it, particularly in connection with this important vulnerability assessment. I also just want to take a second and talk about 2 things that I'm working on in addition to trying to lend a hand to Hillary.
Would you mind standing a little closer to the microphone?
Oh, where's
over on that side.
This? Yeah. I wanted to update on 2 other things I'm working on that related to this. Hopefully you've all heard about Measure AA, which is a $12 parcel tax, which will be on the ballot this June. And the purpose of that parcel tax is to fund tidal wetland restoration. I have the privilege to be the chair of the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority, which, should this measure pass, will collect those funds and then grant them to applicants doing projects around the bay. And as everyone in this room knows, tidal wetlands are incredibly important for not only the ecosystem, but for natural flood control, and can hopefully adapt and stay apace with sea level rise. And the second thing, too, just to briefly mention, is that CCAG has a water committee now, and so a number of council members and myself and Supervisor Horsley and some city managers are, you know, trying to think about how the county can better organize itself to work, you know, collectively on these issues of flooding and sea level rise. And right now, I think we're doing a good job through this collaborative effort. You know, virtually every city has been involved, and every time we have a public forum, we get great turnout. But you know, the role of this CCAG Water Committee is to think about, you know, do we need to have a more formal organization, you know, either in a new entity or under an existing entity, so we could position ourselves to do fundraising, but potentially do a tax measure or otherwise better compete for funding. So those are 2 things that I just want to make sure you were aware of. And with that, again, I really want to thank you for all this work. We've been really putting a lot of demands on the cities and the staff to help us with to get information, and we know it's a lot of work. As you all know, in this study is a little different than some vulnerability studies in that, and we're going to highlight 30 very specific assets and look at them in some detail about their vulnerabilities. And each of those assets is required, you know, a meeting and an interview and a survey. And we have 29 of the 30 done. So that's really great work. Hillary, and TJ, and Deborah, and everybody on the team has done a great job pulling that info together. So we're excited to see the ACOM maps. You know, always interesting to see the latest and greatest, and to see how these maps have been maturing and providing us with more, you know, more accurate portrayal of the risks we face. So thanks.
Okay, great. So before we get started, I'll go over a few logistics. We have food and drink outside, but given that this is the Council Board of Supervisors chamber, there's no food and drink allowed in the chambers. You can have water with a screw top, that's fine. Otherwise, if you need a coffee break, need to grab a snack, you can step outside. We'll have a break after we hear from AECOM. So the first hour of our meeting today will be Michael Mack and Chris May will go over some of the detailed methodology used to put together the overtopping maps that we've created. Then we'll have a break, and then we'll come back and I will give an update on where we are with our sea level rise vulnerability assessment and some of our next steps. And then we're going to have a round robin and discussion on some current efforts that you all are doing on sea level rise and some of your needs going forward as we start to think about how are we going to use the results of this vulnerability assessment. So with that, I think it would be helpful to have just a quick round of introductions so you all know who is in the room. So just if you just say where you're from and your name. So I think you all know me, Hillary Pappendick, Climate Resiliency Specialist, and then
Bob Cook with Invent. Good morning, I'm Ryan Schumacher with South San Francisco, San Bruno, Water Quality Control. Good morning, Lawrence Enriquez, Engineering Division, City of South San Francisco. Son Bourgeois, Executive Project Manager for the South Bay Fall Pond Restoration Project.
I'm Amy Hustle with the State Coast Health Service.
I'm Beatty Kettleton, District Office, Division Planning.
Chris May with AECOM.
Hi, I'm Michelle Senator with Engineering and Caltrain.
Dick Edmonds-Stewart with the Community Task Force.
Hi, Cecilia Mitch.
Art Morimoto, City of Burlington.
Jimmy Tan, City of San Bruno.
Mike Barber with Supervisor City of Pine Top.
I'm Jim Porter, I'm the Director of Public Works for San Mateo County. Mon Haya, Senior Civil Engineer, City of Everett. Serena Duke from City of Everett City.
Chico Rizzo with City of Everett City.
Chris Hunter with the Office of Bound Horsley. I live in Pacifica. Deborah Hurst, also with Supervisor Horsley's office. President. Kelly Kane, Environmental Planning State Planning Commission.
My name is Manuel Campos, Director of Public Works for the City of Pacifica.
Raymond Dominguez, City of Pacifica, Senior Civil Engineer.
Great, and we have 15 attendees on the webinar. We won't be able to introduce those, but thank you all for joining on the webinar. Now I'll turn it over to Michael Mack.
Hi again, my name is Michael Mack. I'm an engineer here with AECOM, and what I wanted to present for the next half an hour is to present the work we've completed for the inundation and overtopping assessment for the San Mateo County Bay Shore. And for those of you who attended the previous working group meeting in December, this is going to present some of the updates that we completed for some of the mapping we showed previously. So just a summary of what I'm going to talk about today. We're going to talk about why we created these maps and what the purpose was. We're going to go and provide an overview of the OCOP versus the ART inundation maps that we have for the Bay Shore. We're going to go and talk about a little bit about the background behind the maps, what data was collected and what data is being used to create these inundation maps. We're also going to talk about what key information is shown on these maps, basically shoreline overtopping and inundation. And we're also going to kind of step through some examples and how to interpret the maps and how to use them to basically look at vulnerabilities along the shoreline. So why do we create these maps? You know, in San Mateo, the shoreline and flood hazards are very complex. You know, there's a wide range of shoreline types in San Mateo County. You know, there's hardened structures and natural shoreline. Some of the hardened structures have revetments, some don't. There's a lot of critical infrastructure near the shoreline. And flood hazards across San Mateo are sort of multi-jurisdictional. You know, flooding doesn't really care for political boundaries, so the ART and inundation maps really help us sort of plan across these jurisdictions. In addition to the large, high-density population along the shoreline, we want to provide San Mateo County and the overall vulnerability assessment with all the tools that have been developed in the Bay and other counties and apply that for the vulnerability assessment. So just a little bit about the OCOF versus the ART inundation maps. OCOF inundation maps provide us with a first broad brush look at areas that are vulnerable to sea level rise and coastal flooding. They help us identify where sea level rise and the storm surge exposure is, and really help inform the vulnerability assessment and decide and inform that selection of basically the 30 vulnerable assets that were looked at. The ART inundation maps provide us with more of a finer scale assessment, and really by that, and we'll talk about some of this throughout the presentation, but this includes refining the topographic data behind the maps, providing additional data sets such as overtopping to help really refine the assessment. The orientation maps also identify when particular assets along the shoreline be impacted. Is it 24 or is it 36 inches of sea level rise? The orientation maps also tell us how assets are at risk. What are the pathways of inundation? Is it local or is it broad scale overtopping that allows floodwaters from the bay to reach particular assets? And really, our inundation maps ultimately will inform the risk profiles for the selected assets in the vulnerability assessment. So I think there's a delay on the slide. Also, the clicker may be out of that. Okay. So I wanted to have a slide to talk about the types of flood hazards on the Pacific coast versus along the bay shore of San Mateo County. So in the bay shore, storm surge and still water flooding is really a dominant flood hazard that drives this inland inundation. Waves are pretty small in the bay, generally less than 5 feet, especially along San Mateo County. And this is really where the ART inundation approach, our methodology works really well. It's been tried and true and tested in different counties, Alameda, San Francisco, Contra Costa, and because the ART inundation maps have been used in different counties, we felt really confident that this would be applicable and great to supplement the San Mateo County vulnerability assessment. On the other hand, on the open coast, waves are really a dominant flood hazard. Waves on the open coast can be really large, 20, 30, even greater than 30 feet at times. The ART approach really hasn't been fully developed yet to account for wave hazard. So this is I think, where the OCOF sort of methodology really shines, is on the open coast capturing wave effects, and it works really well. So these two sort of mapping products really supplement each other. So I kind of talked about some of this background information in previous working group, but for those who are not here, our methodology is basically based on the Adapting to the Rise methodology, or the ART project that's been completed for several counties prior to San Mateo County. So the ART project was really a multi-agency kind of collaboration led by BCDC, supported by Caltrans, ART, MTC, and Alameda County is basically the first county where we implemented these methodologies. And the purpose of the ART project was to refine our understanding of climate-related risk, in particular the sea level rise and storm surge. The project included vulnerability and risk assessments, and that really fed into developing conceptual adaptation strategies for particular assets that were at risk. And really the methods and tools developed through the ART project, they were then updated and applied now to San Mateo County. And what's really nice about the work we're doing for San Mateo County is that this is sort of paving the way for some future work in the Bay, because BCDC, Bay Area Toll Authority, BATA, and MTC, they're going to be developing and rolling out ART inundation maps for basically Bay-wide. And San Mateo County, all the work we're doing is really going to help sort of pave the way and show other counties how they can sort of intertwine and use the OCOF and ART inundation maps together. So just a little background about the water levels behind the maps, because the water levels is really sort of a key component behind the inundation and overtopping maps. So FEMA, for the San Francisco Bay Area Coastal Study, is updating the flood insurance rate maps and the flood insurance studies for the 9 Bay counties. And to support the coastal analysis, a hydrodynamic model of the San Francisco Bay, Mike 21 hydrodynamic model of San Francisco Bay was developed. And along the shore, there are about 8,000 points where water level information is available. And we were able to leverage this information and apply it to this San Mateo inundation mapping. And the hydrodynamic model was calibrated and validated to about 11 storm events, historical storm events at about 8 or 9 different tide stations. So it's been calibrated and validated really well. And we've also used this water level data for some of our other art projects, so we felt really confident in applying this information to these inundation maps. So I'm going to be using a few different terms in this presentation, so I thought I'd just have a sort of a key term slide to talk about some of these terms that I'm going to throw around so that'll get everyone sort of on the same page, I hope. So I'm going to talk about extreme tides, the water elevation. And extreme tides are really sort of these short to medium term increases in water level above astronomical tides. Extreme tides can be kind of driven by storm surge, El Nino, even freshwater discharges can raise water levels above daily astronomical tides. So when I talk about extreme tides, that's really a temporary flooding condition. Eventually, after extreme tides, if storms roll away, floodwaters will recede. When you talk about extreme tides, we also mean that we don't include wave effects. So it's really just that still water inundation when we talk about extreme tides. And although I'm saying extreme tides, other folks may be more familiar with different terms that are used in industry, such as if I say 100-year extreme tide, some folks may be more familiar with a 1% annual chance tide elevation, or 100-year stillwater elevation, or 100-year storm surge. So a lot of these terms I seem to be interchangeable in the industry, so I just want to make sure that everyone has an idea of what I mean by extreme tide. So in the December working group, we first presented the first 3 scenarios out of our total 10 mapping scenario set. And the purpose of this was to get everyone's feedback, firsthand accounts from communities and residents who have, firsthand accounts of flooding in San Mateo County. So for example, if someone had seen flooding on our maps that they've never seen in a 12-inch scenario, then we wanted to know, because that would really make our data set and our overtopping and inundation maps more complete and more correct. So we presented the first 3 scenarios because these are the scenarios that I think that everyone sort of has that first-hand account information about. So for example, for 12 inches of sea level rise above mean high water, which is about today's king tide, working with some of our other agencies, FEMA and SFEI, we knew that when we first created our first 12-inch map, there were different communities that were being flooded during what would be a king tide, and we knew this wasn't the case because of our other kind of past experience at San Mateo County. So we're able to take that knowledge and use that to get more feedback and data from the communities and use that to update the maps. And we did that by updating the topographic data that's behind the inundation mapping. So the topographic data is another key data set besides the water levels that really help let us create these inundation maps. So the topographic data, the source data is the LiDAR data collected in 2010 by USGS. And this is actually the same source data that the OCOP maps are based on. We of course use a finer sort of resolution of topographic data. We use this 1 meter by 1 meter grid that covers San Mateo County. But what was great about getting feedback from the communities is that we were able to identify key flood protection structures that were missing in that original sort of data collection and conversion effort. So using the data that we were provided by communities and data that we were able to seek out, we were able to modify the DEM to capture these structures and really let our data set represent the current conditions to the best extent that we can possible. So just some key areas that we did some modifications to our topographic data include SFO, the Coast Guard property, Foster City, River Shore, San Mateo. We even did some field verifications in Burlingame, and we also modified some elevations in East Palo Alto just based on data we were able to collect. And that's really kind of a key process in our methodology, because that's the framework that's set up lets us kind of use community feedback, come back, see what doesn't make sense on the maps, and make those corrections to make sure that we capture inundation and flooding sort of to the best extent that we can. So after we modified the topographic data, we then updated the remaining maps, and including the first 3 scenarios that were originally mapped. So we basically created a set of 10 total maps. And there were 10 maps, but what I'm going to talk about in the upcoming slides each of these maps can represent many different combinations of extreme tides and sea level rise. And we'll kind of talk about the methodology we've created to help everyone unlock these maps for different purposes, looking at the vulnerability of the shoreline. So some of the information that's actually shown on the maps, and we can take a look at the maps after the presentation. What we do is we show a shoreline delineation, and the shoreline delineation is leveraged from SFBI's work. SFBI has actually updated their shoreline delineation bay-wide, and I believe that was released publicly last week, although we were able to use this information and get this from SFBI before it was public. So the shoreline delineation that you see on the maps is really just tracing the high ground along the shoreline. That's tracing the crest of levees, engineered structures, roadways, etc., anything that would prevent floodwater from being conveyed inland. So in addition to sort of these hardened structures and sort of that first line of defense, we also trace some of the natural shoreline. And that really helps you look at not just the hardened structures and the hardened shoreline, but look at when marshes might be impacted by different levels of sea level rise. So the shoreline delineation really feeds into allowing us to calculate overtopping along the shoreline. So the shoreline delineation that you'll see on the maps, they're going to be colored. Each segment of the shoreline is going to be colored different colors, and different colors represent different depths of overtopping, from 0 to 1 feet, 1 to 2 feet, 2 to 3 feet, etc. And what we mean by overtopping is when you have the water level exceeding the elevation of the shoreline, that's what we call overtopping. So we calculate different depths that the shoreline is overtopping each 100-foot segment of shoreline. Conversely, if you have the water level below the crest elevation of an asset or shoreline, that's freeboard. So on the maps, you may see some gray dash line where it's not colored either green, red, or yellow. That means a particular shoreline segment has freeboard. So because our product is more of a mapping exercise than a modeling effort, I wanted to sort of go over some of the key concepts that our maps can or cannot represent. So on our maps, you may see inland flooding. You may see overtopping of inland areas, but the first line of shoreline may not be overtopped. And when you see inland flooding, the elevation that the floodwaters reach will be the same elevation as what's in the bay. So basically everything kind of equalizes because we don't really account for how floodwaters can recede over time. And if a community has the ability to reduce floodwaters or reduce flooding through pumping or some other hydraulic measure, we aren't capturing that in the maps currently. So if you look at the map and you see a portion of the shoreline that looks like it's above the water level, but you see flooding, that may be because there is another flood pathway that is reaching from a different neighborhood or a different portion of the shoreline and just sort of reaching in around the first line of defense. So that's just something you see on the maps when you take a look at them in more detail. So our maps, I want to talk about 3 different sort of concepts that our maps can represent, and this will kind of feed into letting you what scenarios each map can actually represent. So I have this animation to kind of support sort of these concepts that I want to talk about. So our maps can represent sort of this first condition, which is temporary flooding. Temporary flooding is when you get extreme tides that roll in on top of mean high water or daily high tide, and you'll see that low-lying areas in the front of the shoreline, they're going to be flooded. And if you have assets in this portion of the shoreline and that are sensitive to flooding, they may not be, they may be damaged, it may be difficult to recover, and you need repairs. There may be other assets that might be able to recover once floodwater recedes, such as roadways, etc. We also show on our maps low-lying areas. Low-lying areas are highlighted in green. And what those are is we want to highlight the fact that there are low-lying areas that are protected by high ground that may not be shown as flooding, but that doesn't mean they're not at risk. In our maps, we may not capture hydraulic structures, culverts, any drainage structures, and we want to make sure that these low-lying areas aren't shown as no risk. We want to make sure that everyone still sees these areas as potential areas of risk. So eventually, flowwaters recede, and we can move on to the next concept that our maps can show, and that's permanent inundation. So permanent inundation, you get permanent sea level rise on top of high tides, so the high tides are now stretched higher. You basically have low-lying areas along the shoreline that can no longer be used because that portion of the shoreline is now experiencing inundation from daily high tides every day. So you still have low-lying areas in the back protected by high ground, but again, these areas still might be risk, so we show that on the map. And the third sort of concept is the combination. So when you get sea level rise, you have this sort of higher base water level that extreme tides can come in on. And eventually, areas that were never flooded before, and you may not realize that they had the potential for being flooded, they can now be flooded with that higher base water level from sea level rise. So eventually, extreme tides will roll away from the shoreline, and you may be able to use some of the inland areas again, but these are sort of the concepts that our maps are trying to show. So I have this table. It's a lot of numbers, so I'm going to go through it, and I think when I go through it, it'll look a lot more simple. So our 10 maps, what we wanted to do is we wanted to create a way to kind of expand upon the scenarios that they represent, and that'll provide versatility in looking at overall vulnerability along the shoreline, depending on whether or not you're interested in permanent sea level rise or impacts from temporary flooding. So in this table, on the left-hand column, we have our different mapping scenarios. Each of these mapping scenarios are in 6-inch increments. We don't have maps that kind of correlate to each of these scenarios, but this will just help kind of populate the table. To the right, we have the depth that each extreme tide is above existing mean high water. So for example, the 100-year extreme tide is 42 inches above mean high water. Or another example is the 10-year extreme tide is 27 inches above mean high water. That's that first column that's sort of highlighted in the blue. So to populate this table, we just add different increments of sea level rise or water levels, 6, 12, 18, 24, 36 inches, a water level above those base extreme tide levels. So just to step through an example, I'm going to talk about the map that we created that is supposed to represent mean high water plus 36 inches. So each of the cells colored in red show you all the equivalent sea level rise and extreme tide scenarios that will be the same and what will be shown on this 36-inch map. So for example, this 36-inch map that we're going to show is equivalent to a 50-year extreme tide with no sea level rise. Kind of stepping through the table, this map, this 36-inch map, is also equivalent to a 10-year extreme tide with 12 inches sea level rise. And all the way, when you add more sea level rise, you get 24 inches plus a 1-year extreme tide. So basically, what you're seeing is that as you add more and more sea level rise, assets or shorelines can be overtopped by smaller and smaller storm events. So this is one way to kind of expand upon the scenarios and versatility of the maps. And I know that some people don't really want to look at tables, and I thought a visual might be helpful. So this visual is going to say the same thing that I was talking about in the table. So we just take our map that's 36 inches above mean high water. That's the equivalent to mean high water plus 36 inches of permanent sea level rise. It's also equivalent to 12 inches of sea level rise plus a 10-year extreme tide. And it's also equivalent to a 50-year extreme tide with no sea level rise. So all of these are equivalent water levels. Different combinations of extreme tides and storm surge can equal the same water level. And that's sort of our one map equals many features concept. One thing I wanted to note about the matrix, or sea level rise matrix, our table of water levels, is that that's really representative of San Mateo County as a whole. And it works because there are relationships between mean high water, high tide, and extreme tides that are constant throughout San Mateo County. But in reality, the absolute elevations relative to NAVD kind of vary along the shoreline. And if anyone is interested in collecting this information for San Mateo County, we have it in the report. But I want to kind of give a newsflash that this information bay-wide is available now through the San Francisco Bay Tidal Datum Study. And this study basically provides tidal datums from mean high water to mean low water and extreme tide levels from the 1 year to 500-year level for about 900 locations across the bay. So this information is now available in the report and has maps and a table of all these elevations, is available at R9 Coastal and Adapting to Rising Tides website. And this information is also available for San Mateo County. So I'm just going to show on the next slide sort of a snapshot of what that information looks like. And we will just focus on the image to the right, which is showing you all the locations where mean high water is now available. We have 900 locations, and in San Mateo County, it probably varies about half a foot or a little more. So just to give you guys a snapshot of what's available in the bay, if anyone's interested in collecting the data. So I won't kind of step through the table, but what this table is showing you now is that matrix I talked about, except it's color-coded to show each of the extreme tide and sea level rise scenarios that each of our 10 maps can represent. So each different color band represents all the different scenarios that our maps can represent. And all in all, there's probably about 50 total combinations that we can get out of our 10 maps. So I think that's a really useful product for looking at different vulnerabilities and types of vulnerabilities of the shoreline. So I want to step through some of the maps, the results of our work. So this map is showing you 36 inches above mean high water. And again, talking about the different equivalent water scenarios and using that matrix. This map shows you not only permanent inundation of 36 inches of sea level rise, which is what we expect for the bay as the most likely sea level rise scenario for 2100, but also shows you areas that will be temporarily flooded from no sea level rise in the 50-year extreme tide. So that's just one of the scenarios that this map will represent, but when you take a look at the full map set, we actually have all these scenarios that are equivalent written on the maps. So the next scenario is going to be 66 inches above mean high water. Now this map represents permanent inundation of 66 inches sea level rise, and that's what we can expect for the bay for the year 2100 based on sort of that high-end projection range. This map can also represent temporary flooding of 24 inches sea level rise plus 100-year storm surge. The next map, this is the highest water level scenario that we actually mapped. And this is meant to not show what permanent sea level rise will look like, because that's not what we really expect, 100 inches sea level rise by end of the century, or even close to that. But this map is meant to represent temporary flooding based on a lower amount of sea level rise, 66 inches plus 100-year storm surge. So this is sort of the largest extent of the exposure zone that we've kind of mapped for San Mateo County. So the applications, we talked about sea level rise and extreme tide matrix. That helps us identify combinations of equivalent sea level rise and extreme tide scenarios. You know, we can see how the shoreline protection, level protection can change over time. And we can use this matrix to help unlock all the maps and use this. You know, this is meant to be used in tandem with the maps. So the inundation maps and overtopping maps, you know, they'll help us identify when assets will be impacted. You know, is it permanent inundation, 40 inches, or is it temporary flooding of 6 inches of plus 100-year? And the maps also let us know how assets are at risk. You know, it'll help us locate vulnerable sections of the shoreline and really identify these pathways of inundation that lead from overtopping the shoreline to a critical asset. And the next few slides, I'm just going to talk about a particular example to kind of focus in on a particular area and sort of highlight how we can read the maps in more detail. So I'm going to focus in on the South San Francisco-San Bruno area, and particularly focus on the South San Francisco-San Bruno water quality plant. So that's going to be highlighted in this blue box. So we're going to zoom in on our maps and take a deeper dive right now. So this first slide is showing you mean high water plus 12 inches sea level rise. And again, based on that matrix, the equivalent scenario for temporary flooding is annual tide with no sea level rise. Depending on what you want to look at, you can use this map for that purpose. There really isn't much impact here. We can see that there's some green low-lying areas to the south near the Coast Guard property. That just means these areas are, we're calling it still at risk because there's no direct flood pathway, but we may be missing something in the map. So also in red, we have sort of the treatment facilities outlined. So those aren't actually shown on our maps right now, but just for this presentation. So this next map is 24 inches of sea level rise, permanent inundation. But if you want to look at the equivalent scenarios to the bottom panel, you can see all of the equivalent sort of temporary conditions that this map can represent. This map can also represent a 10-year extreme tide with no sea level rise. So you see that green area that we showed before is now blue, down near the Coast Guard property. So basically the shoreline has been overtopped now, and flooding has found a way to impact the structures in this area. We don't see much impact, direct impact in other areas, but keep in mind that if this is 24 inches sea level rise, the bay water levels will be higher by about 2 feet. So if you have outfall or other drainage structures, they'll be impacted. You just might not see it on the maps right now. So 36 inches sea level rise, again, permanent inundation of 36 inches, or the equivalent scenario shown on the bottom panel. So what you're seeing now is much more direct impact of flooding from the bay. So if we just look at sort of that area around 101 and Culver Creek, I'm going to have a highlight that on the map. So you see right now that there's actually overtopping over the creek, and it's really feeding some of these inland areas. And not too large of an area, but you see the highways being impacted right now. And really what's happening is there's localized overtopping over the creek. And you can see this when you dive into the maps and look at the different depths of overtopping and see sort of those colors start to blink on the map. And this really means that it's not a very large stretch of shoreline that's being overtopped and impacted. So you can probably implement, a smaller scale strategy, a lower cost strategy to protect these areas, this particular scenario. So this is now 48 inches of sea level rise, permanent inundation, or the equivalent scenario shown in the bottom right-hand corner. There's a lot more impact here. So you'll see now that there's a lot of broad overtopping and inundation around that area, highlighted in the purple box. So what this means is that the strategies you may have implemented in 36 inches for that previous scenario won't work anymore, because you're going to have flooding and overtopping over much broader stretches of shorelines. You need to have more coordination between shorelines to really prevent and mitigate impacts to these areas and any critical assets that might be in here. So you'll see the different colors overtopping again kind of grow in color from yellow and green to red. So it'll help you identify the lowest sections of the shoreline. So in addition to the sort of broad scale overtopping, we're going to have direct impacts to the treatment facility now. So we're going to highlight that in a second. So you basically see there's some short sections of shoreline that are overtopped, and you have some facilities that are directly impacted. So if you're looking at temporary flooding, you may still be able to implement maybe a small, low-cost strategy along the shoreline to prevent inundation and overtopping of these particular areas. But if you're thinking about permanent sea level rise, think about all these other areas that are being impacted. The highway, key transportation routes, how are you going to access your facility is something you need to think about, looking at different scenarios. And that's something that maps help you kind of look at. What's the timing of impact, what are the sources of flooding, etc. And this is, so see the sort of dotted red line, if my mouse is working right there, that's the South San Francisco San Bruno treatment facility. But we're also looking at some of these other industrialized commercial areas to the north. Yeah, so this is the last map that I'll show. This is 52 inches sea level rise, or if you think about the equivalent scenario, it's 12 inches sea level rise plus 100 extreme tide. This is kind of like a tipping point map. You're starting to see system-wide inundation here. You may not be able to use any sort of localized strategy at this point, and this kind of promotes the need to look across jurisdictions and looking across multiple shorelines to come up with regional strategies. So that's sort of the update on the work we've done today. We have the 10 maps for everyone to look at. That's online. And one of the questions I typically get a lot, is how do these compare to the OCOP map? So I'm just going to end with just 3 slides to show you some of the differences in comparison. And the ART maps and the OCOP maps, they're different because they use different methods to make the maps. They have different scenarios. It's slightly different topography. So we're just going to try to do our best to make the most equal comparison that we can. So So on the left, we have the art inundation maps, 40 inches of sea level rise. And on the right, we have the OCOP maps, 40 inches of sea level rise, of mean high water. So you'll see some differences. The art maps, obviously, this is a higher scenario. But this is kind of meant to show that there are differences. So you can't always do a one-to-one comparison. But in general, you see many sections of the shoreline that are impacted. I think the next slide will be a better example of a comparison. So the 66 inches of sea level rise map for the ARC maps are shown on the left, and OCOP is 68. So this is a much more similar scenario. And you'll see that many areas are similarly inundated at this scenario. So this last slide would kind of show you a different area. This is a different scenario. This is 6 inches of sea level rise with 100-year extreme tide versus 9 inches on the OCOP maps and 100-year extreme tide. So many areas are similarly inundated. We see that on the art maps we have a little more inundation in some areas, but it's just we're using a different topographic data set, a more finer scale resolution. So that's just sort of a comparison between the two maps. So I thought if anyone's interested, we'll have that information on the PowerPoint. And that's it. So thanks everyone. So we have Hillary, I guess we have all the maps. We have some maps printed, and everyone can access all the maps online. And that should be in that flyer that Hillary and everyone sent out.
Yeah, has anybody used the online viewer? Has it been working okay? Great. So I think now we have time for question and answer. So because of the webinar, we want to use the microphone so people on the online can hear us.
Sure. Actually cannot scroll right now.
Oh, I can do it.
Sure. Sure. When you look at the maps, even online or on the screen, there's a key in the middle, different sort of blue shades. That'll show you the different depths of overtopping. Sorry, different depths of inundation or flooding that you'll see. You'll see 0 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, and that'll sort of match what's on the screen in terms of if you see something that's dark blue, which I don't think we may see on this map, but maybe kind of near that natural area, the natural marsh here, those would be inundated or flooded to about 12 to 14 feet. So when you see sort of the lighter shades of blue, those that represent sort of shallower flood, 0 to 2. So that's what the maps represent in the blue color. And then the shoreline overtopping potential line, you see that shoreline delineation, you kind of follow my mouse. Different colors represent different depths of overtopping. And that's simply just a calculation between what the elevation of a particular shoreline a particular shoreline elevation is versus what the elevation of the bay water is. So basically, maybe we isolate the two out first. If we just look at this map with a line, you'll see all the areas that are inundated. That's sort of that flood extent with different colors. That's what we mean by inundation and flooding. So those areas that correspond to different colors on the legend. Overtopping is really just how much that water level is above the shoreline. Does that make sense? Yeah.
But when you have a really low water level, you might have really broad scale inundation, but that overtopping is going to show you like where along the line is overtopping inundate that area. So you might have a small area of adaptation that's going to eliminate a broad area of inundation. Yeah, finding. Yeah, we've wrestled with different ways to call it. Is it a weak link or when you look at the OPOC map, you just see a whole lot of inundation. It's not telling you where is that water actually coming
if you see anything that's red and there's nothing else colored but green and yellow, that shows you the lowest portion of the shoreline. That's typically where you have, if you want to call it a weak lake or just the low line portion of the shoreline.
The lowest point is what color?
If you were to kind of break this out, the lowest point would be the pink color, greater than 5 feet of overtopping. So when you have 0 to 1, that's almost at the water level. That's just below the water level. But greater than 5 means you're 5 feet below the water level.
Clear on that. So with the overtopping potential, those are areas that are low lying, but based on whatever structures may be there, are not going to be affected by, are not necessarily going to be flooded. But if we miss something, water finds its way in somehow to reflect there. If it's low lying, is that right? The way to look at it?
Well, since we just delineated sort of a line on the high point, if we have a low-lying high point, floodwaters will just kind of go over it. It can't really collect, per se, like on top of it. It'll just be above the shoreline. But if it's low-lying, it'll let the floodwaters through. If it's higher, then it won't.
Can you go back to the SSCI side?
One more. One more. Yep. So further.
So understood shoreline delineation, SSCI at the top.
Yep, that's there.
Yeah, so one of the values of this is it's not, you have the whole GIS data set. On the map, you're just seeing what the depth is of overtopping on that specific structure. But if you have the GIS data set, it also is tagged with what is that structure. So do you have overtopping, 1 foot of overtopping on an engineered flood protection levee? Or is it 1 foot of overtopping over a roadway or a rail embankment? So the actual structure type that's delineated is tagged. And that's really useful when you're looking at what kind of adaptation strategies you can do. If you're looking in an area where all of your overtopping is coming across, a highway embankment, you're probably going to look at different strategies than if it's a levee and you just need to kind of raise it a foot. And this delineation is at a really, high level of detail. They've delineated more features than, you really need to do this overtopping assessment. All of the marshes and the pond berms, and so it's a really amazing data set. And this shows you, for each scenario, it's mapped, how is that overtopping growing along this delineation. There's a huge amount of power behind this if you actually use all of that GIS data instead of just using PDF copies of the maps or using the map viewer. That helps more kind of explain what you're looking at.
So with the wetlands, like right there is Bear Island, and then in the inundation map, it shows Bear Island being inundated at various sea level rise. But Bear Island is already inundated, it's tidal wetland, and I guess that, I mean, the issue for the wetlands would just be if the sediment vegetation can't keep up with the inundation. And is that anywhere in here, or is that a different?
I think in this study, we haven't looked at, what type of sedimentation or grade you would need here to keep up with that March 60 sea level rise. And essentially, some of these maps, you're not always looking at sea level rise, but you're looking also at storm surge inundation, and you wouldn't anticipate, marshes are going to affect that. But I mean, this information can help you, particularly if you're looking at those permanent inundation scenarios, kind of see how much is that elevation in mind, this is also based on that 2010 topographic data, and definitely in a lot of the marsh areas around the bay, we've seen there's been changes that have occurred, since 2010, particularly in restoration areas. But yeah, it's not including that kind of marsh.
So, question on this one is, again, it's color coding, but you've got the darker blue close to the shore. I'm looking at the table, it's a little confusing. It seems like the darker blue is a higher depth, and the lighter blue is a lower depth.
Yes, the darker blues represent deeper depth of inundation versus the lighter blue is more shallower, maybe 0 to 2 feet, 2 to 4 feet.
So in this particular case, it seems a little odd that the shoreline by the San Mateo County, call it north of San Mateo County, it's inundated after the other piece, the light blue inside. I'm assuming that's because there's overtopping upstream in Palma. Just curious why the dark.
Are we talking about this area here?
Yeah, that area there. Why that inundated the higher level than the property?
So if we just if we're talking about this sort of perimeter dark blue around the area, it just means that the elevation on the outer shoreline are much lower than as you kind of reach up towards the top of the structure. So as you kind of
Okay, so it's the depth of water.
yeah, it's the depth of water. So as you increase on the slope, you just have shallower water depth.
And then just back one slide. Yeah, the dark green over at green and lower left.
Over here in the bottom left.
I'm assuming that's navigable slope. Where does that tie in?
Are we talking about this?
Yeah,
this low line?
Right. Where does it tie in the table? I see there's a dark green in the bottom.
Oh, this one? Okay, yeah. That's just saying disconnected areas greater than 1 acre. So that doesn't necessarily tie into our table of scenarios. It's just showing you the areas that are low lying but not directly connected to any inundation in this scenario, but maybe at a later scenario.
Right. Well, there's.
We don't have all the culverts now, so you want to highlight that there still could be a flood event there. We just don't know what that is.
Right. Okay. I'm just sort of curious. That part I actually understand in the county. Are there other? Just looking at one part. Other parts that are fairly unique. Are there other parts of the county map that have that color?
Yes. So in every scenario, if we kind of go back to the sort of that first time I presented the county-wide layer, you'll see that there are sort of green areas in different communities and different sort of fringe areas beyond that extent of inundation or flooding. So we'll highlight these everywhere we are able to, and that's just a part of the calculations and the methodology we created. So anything that's greater than 1 acre that's low lying, we'll capture that. And any locations that show this green area, there might be a culvert or hydraulic structure that's not captured in the mapping. So those areas are definitely, I think, if anyone is aware of culverts that exist, that may just highlight, that there is still risk there.
So this shows like mostly the base side, but on the coast side, there's not much of coloring. Was the study done for versus how much inundation?
So these mapping products that we created, they are only for the bayshore or the bayside. So there's actually nothing shown on the Pacific coast side, at least from the ART inundation mapping. But the OCOP mapping products will cover the Pacific coast side. But we're not showing that in this particular presentation. Although the overall vulnerability assessment is using the OCOP data for the Pacific coast side.
And I brought copies of those maps.
I just wanted to follow up on that question. Are you planning on including the coast side at a later date?
As of right now, we don't. We're not planning to include the ART inundation maps as a part of the project right now, the Open Coast. We haven't fully developed a methodology through the ART process to kind of capture sort of that different type of flood hazard on the Pacific coast, which is mostly wave dominated. But as of right now, the ART maps are only going to be available for the bay side, and the vulnerability assessment will be using OCOP maps on the Pacific coast.
So it looks like we're just looking at a really specific area in South San Francisco.
Sure.
Could we look at some of the other areas to better understand how the mapping works? Because I think the part that I'm struggling with is not the blue bars, but when you have the overtopping, the color
Sure.
overtopping. And I know we've covered this already, but I'm still trying to process how that works. And I think I'll get it eventually. It just seems like it would help us if we look at more than just one location.
So maybe we can pull it online.
Yeah.
So I think what we'll do is we'll pull up the online map, and we'll be able to pan around, look at specific areas, and pull up different scenarios.
It always takes a little time to load.
Yeah, and if it doesn't load right away, we can also give a further compare over it.
So it's 11:09. We'll do 5 more minutes of questions, and then we can break. And then those of you who want to look more at the viewer can come up and we can play around with the viewer during the break. So I guess while we're waiting for the viewer, are there any additional questions? Deborah? Oh, it's Sam.
Yeah, I just want to make a follow-up. So, will there be a presentation for us also by the coast after you? Is there like a plan to proceed with the study on the coast side, and will there be a similar presentation?
So at the December technical working group meeting, we unveiled the coastal maps with the different scenarios that we chose, and those haven't changed. We're using existing ArcOSERV feature modeling for the coast side. We took the GIS from the ArcOSERV feature, overlaid it with the erosion map from Pacific Institute, and those are the maps. So we can pull up the ArcOSERV feature tool and go to the scenarios if you want. That is the data that we're using. So that viewer exists. For the bay side, the ArcOSERV feature doesn't capture all of the intricacies and the complexities of the shoreline, and the rest of the counties are using the ARC methodology. So we're doing a combined approach. We have ArcOSERV feature for the coast, the ARC for the bay. So this is the unveiling of these additional maps for the bay side. Does that answer your question? And Michael has some clarification as well. Okay.
Just to clarify, as far as the county is concerned, we did include the coast from after the north. To Hillary's point, OCOP was the only available map for both shore. What you're seeing today is AECOM did it. They were funded partly through the work FEMA and so forth. They've done 9 counties within the bay. AECOM did not do coast side marine or just clarifying, because there's 2 different things going on here. Yeah, it sounds like at this point in time, partly funding and partly figuring out the technological side, because the way back to the left my point is a different issue on the coast.
Microphone, just so we can record it. Can you repeat that in the microphone?
The way I look at it is that if there are a lot of unknowns on the coast side,
As of now, it's not done for the coast, so that would be the first step if this was to be done on the coast. This approach would have to be modified to look at the wave overtopping, and the Arcos Our Future does an excellent job at the wave run-up, and really is a sophisticated tool for looking at what the impacts are on the coast side. So in terms of what are the effects of sea level rise inundation, the Arcos Our Future tool, I don't think it needs any additional refining. It's an excellent tool. So, but in terms of what we're doing next, in terms of phase 2 from the vulnerability assessment, there is going to be, this is really the first step. So we want to work with you all to understand how can we help this information be relevant to your processes, what kind of online viewers, tools, et cetera, can be most useful for you to use the data, and then also how can we work together to come up with regional adaptation strategies and actions. So that's part of our conversation we'll have after the break as well.
I think one other concern on the coral cell process and the concern about block erosion, and that's something else that
Right, I guess. So that, I guess the Arcos Our Future tool does not include future erosion. So it does a really good job with waves, but when I said, I guess it does have a gap there where it does not show future erosion. Half Moon Bay has their meeting tonight on the sea level rise map, and they are looking at future erosion. I don't know, Jill, do you want to pass the microphone to Jill to make it?
So I was just going to make a comment about erosion on the coast side, and yeah, I'm really glad that that's come up because that's such a huge factor in the picture for the coast side. And it's great that the city of Half Moon Bay is looking at that. I know that in Pacifica they recently had a meeting about sea level rise and erosion was a big focus of that. The coast side meaning the Montero through Half Moon Bay is having a meeting on May 24th specifically about erosion. It's going to be at the Douglas Beach House at 6:30 p.m., which is the Volcanic and Dynamite Society. So I think there does need to be a lot more work done on mapping that includes erosion predictions, and I think that's the piece that we're missing on the coast side. So I'm really glad that that's on.
Yeah, and so while you're passing the microphone, USGS is working to extend the Cosmos model, which is what Arcos Our Future is based on, through Southern California, and that includes this next version, Cosmos, I think maybe it's 3.0 or 2.0, which includes this projected erosion incorporating sea level rise. What the Arcos Our Future does right now, they look at historical rates and they project those in the future, but it doesn't look at accelerated erosion. So that methodology is being developed. Now it's a matter of finding the funding and the time for USGS to update the tool here. Go ahead, Jill. And then
Thank you for everything that I wanted to suggest that Half Moon Bay has a sea level rise vulnerability assessment for near-term scenarios. And our big picture item, of course, is erosion. And the overtopping situation is really not necessarily the story that we want to look at. Our next step is to understand the acceleration of erosion in sea level rise. We have erosion maps. Hillary was saying we have the OCOS maps that are both great, but we don't know what the influence is of the different on each other. So what we really hope for in the next step is estimation and modeling to find those things. So we wonder about a different kind of strategy for what rate to do with these.
yeah.
So I don't know how many people are aware, but FEMA led a sea level rise and coastal erosion study for the San Francisco Open Coast. It was the only pilot study on the West Coast looking at how you could map these issues from a FEMA perspective. FEMA has funding to do this for additional counties on the California Open Coast. And I know FEMA said at a recent meeting on the Open Coast when they had their TCO meeting, they said, hey, if you want us to come to your county and make these maps for you, just tell us and we'll do it. But they haven't gotten that message yet. So if you want FEMA to come and they have the funding to start looking at this on your Open Coast, then let them know, and they can definitely bring that
You can talk to Ed Curtis at FEMA, FEMA Region 9.
But Chris, I mean, they have, FEMA has done this open coast study.
It's in addition. So the FEMA Open Coast Study just looks at existing coastal hazards, which is the FEMA regulatory standard to look at existing, not sea level rise. But since Congress has mandated that FEMA needs to start looking at climate change, they did this pilot study on the open coast of California, or the open coast of San Francisco, and that will look at sea level rise and coastal erosion. It identifies, where your seawall structures are, and can look at if you don't maintain that seawall, what could your coastal erosion be in that area. So I think it's a really helpful data set that FEMA can produce for you. I think FEMA's just hoping. FEMA doesn't want to produce data that people don't want and aren't going to use, and these are non-regulatory products. But if they would be helpful, I mean, definitely raise your hand, call Ed Curtis, let them know. Yeah, cool. Yeah, Ed Curtis is a FEMA Region 9 engineer that's leading the Open Pacific Coast Study. So it's 11:19. So we will reconvene in 10 minutes. Thank you. So we have the viewer up here. If anyone would like to come up and take a look around.
So, how are you kind of modeling? It sounds like the tools are there.
And then the
If anybody wants to look at this, all right. People wanted to, but now they're like, yeah. That's so funny. Yeah. I noticed that, like,
so can I look at maps?
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, quick question. Maybe you were texting me. So she was talking to me about the California Natural Resources Agency work that's going on called State Park California. You guys are familiar with that?
Yeah, that's the state climate action implementation plan, how to prepare for it. So they developed the safeguarding plan 5 years ago, so now they have an implementation plan. Have you reviewed that?
Well, we were talking about it because apparently they're working on updating regulations by, she said 3 meters wide if ice sheet collapses. not even worried about
3 meters and 9 feet. So our high-end scenario is 6 feet plus a 100-year storm, which is equivalent to 9 feet. So this is also not our view on what we can do.
Right.
So we haven't come to that step yet. This is where are they vulnerabilities. So actually our scenarios do incorporate that if we were to have 9 feet of sea level rise, we can see
you're going that way.
we can see because we've combined plus a 100-year storm, that ends up being about 9 feet.
Yeah.
So if we look at the question of what would happen if there may be a scenario, we do have that.
At this point, I don't know if it's 9 feet or not, or what ours is predicted.
Yeah.
Or, what I was hearing was that the ice now was probably right about 8.
So it doubles the IPCC prediction. The California, yes, so which was pretty low because it didn't incorporate any of the The California study did include some hiking mountains, so that's why the high end is 5 and 10 feet. So what's the new study that says sea level rise could be 6 feet by 20 we have 5 and 1/2 in California projection. So is there
But you guys have gone beyond that in your map.
Yes, we're not saying 9 feet could happen, but we have that water level there as a component of what. Yeah. That you can say, well,
There it is.
There it is.
Oh, well, you were looking really close to where I wanted to know.
Oh, okay.
Let's see, we were in that area. What is this island anyway? What is that thing? I'm curious. I'm gonna drive over there and look at what's going on there. Could we look at just one map? I don't know what it is.
Yeah, let's see.
I just suppose I could ask my questions. Anyway, but I don't know that area. You know what it's like if you're like, you don't know the area.
Yeah.
Brought ones that you'd already printed because we're just trying to save on paper so we can print a bunch, but what you can use the viewer.
It's just, yeah, we just take a little while.
Oh.
Okay. We want an oyster point, I'm guessing? Oh, there it goes.
Okay, this is
48.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't bring my reading. Can't see very well. That's okay. Okay, so what is this one? This is the lowest?
This is
Okay, what's now, today? Like, where do you show it?
well, now today, we don't actually show it right now, if that makes sense. We're only really showing like,
So this is oyster point.
if you want to think about it, if you look at the table, this is probably about the middle, particularly about the
Flood map. Okay.
Is that the 100-year storm? It didn't use that wording,
well, I don't say star levels, but I don't want to incorporate that rainfall runoff.
okay, so that's not incorporated.
No, yeah, so our maps don't incorporate that. Runoff and rainfall and localized on one site. That's why I try to stick to it.
I wondered about that related to the green area. Some of that green area might be subject.
Yeah, so basically a part of the green area that's like, well, if there's localized on one project, those would be impacted.
Where do we start if we want to look at what your maps are showing as flooding that's already happening today?
So, right.
Yeah,
Maybe,
like current
yeah,
situation.
yeah, so really,
Where would we go? 12 inches? That's your lowest?
well, so what we can show 12 inches is
Okay, so we look at like 12. I think that's where I started. Okay, so this is not showing any of the flooding that's already happened over here. I've been all documented, video, photos, evidence, all that flooded, all of that. So how do we fix that? And then tell me about the green location.
Let's talk about the green location. Again, we're using.
Go look a little bit. Oh no.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I went ahead.
So basically, what happens here is the water level of the mountain, which is 12 inches, it's 12, 13 times, probably about it's a foot above the high water. So that's probably about 8 feet, maybe deep. So right now you see some potential for shoreline. And then those areas, of course, green. So I think the darkest green, that is the portion that's shoreline.
It's very low.
It's one of the lowest portions of the shoreline here.
This little map so I can see the color. That's the part I'm really having trouble with. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So the green is showing the lowest area.
Flooding. Wherever it's
Which-
highlighted.
Okay, so that's showing that it doesn't take very much flooding for that area to be breached. My understanding.
Well, it's the flooding and but that could be a very good to understand. This is the lowest portion of the shoreline. The 1, 2, 3, this here, if there was sort of the highlight, those would be flooded first.
If these green areas would be flooded first.
Yeah, because they're the lowest one.
Okay, so it is showing low.
Yeah.
So you could like say if you were not this location, but it's say another place, maybe Foster City, and you
Yeah.
were talking about levees, you could use using this to
Yeah.
help chart
And
where.
that's kind of why I was getting into it. This one, this map, so this is temperature, but I think we want to talk about probably about you'll see that here, that portion of the coastguard area, and that portion of the road line, the pathway of elevation, all of that.
So they know that's a weak point.
Yeah, so it's like sort of that area, and that's what on it.
So that helps them figure out.
Yeah,
We got it.
yeah, so that helps you like, where do you want to start?
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So please take your seat.
Okay, that helps me understand.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Okay, do we have everyone? Looks like we might have lost a few people. Are people still outside? Okay, all right, we'll just go ahead and get started. So I'm going to give a brief update on where we are with the vulnerability assessment, highlight some of our next steps, and then we'll turn it over to a discussion to hear more about efforts that you all have, and then hear more about some of the needs for our next steps. So as Supervisor Pine mentioned, sea level rise has been in the news a lot lately. I'm sure a lot of you have been following some of these news efforts. And one thing that maybe we don't want to be called out about being in the news is that San Mateo County is one of 5 counties in the nation that has over 100,000 people at risk from 3 feet of sea level rise by 2100. Here's an overview of our updated project timeline. So as you all know, we are in the middle of our vulnerability and risk assessment stage and in the process of developing our asset profiles. So thank you to a lot of you who have spent time filling out questionnaires, some of you multiple questionnaires, for meeting with us, for taking us on site visits. It's been extremely valuable. This is definitely a truly cooperative effort. So at this point, we're taking all that information that we have gathered from you all. We're typing up the profiles. We should have those ready for review in May. So Arcadis will send you the profile. You can take a look, make sure it is correct, portrays everything, we're not missing anything, and then we'll come up with a second version that will be ready for our stakeholder review. After we're done with the asset vulnerability profiles, the next step is to start talking about adaptation strategies. And as part of our project scope, we'll be developing 2 renderings for areas in the county, and these will be a graphic display of what future adaptation strategies could look like along the shoreline. So this is really where that multi-jurisdictional piece comes in. After we do the adaptation strategy piece, Arcadis will develop a draft report that will be towards the end of the summer, and then the final report will be in early fall. So our next stakeholder meeting will be in June. We've decided to have a combined stakeholder meeting this next time. This will be a lot of us updating you all with where we are with the asset vulnerability profiles and the adaptation strategies. So this will be the combined with the technical working group and the policy advisory committee and members of the community task force that are interested in attending. We're looking at mid-June. We need to set a date as soon as possible because now that seems like it's right around the corner. So as soon as we have a date, we'll let you know, and we will try to find a convenient location for that as well. We have a list of all of the 30 assets, so in the hallway, in case you wanted a refresher of which 30 assets that we picked, here's the map of where they are. I'm happy to talk more about why we picked them and the decision that went into the case study assets, but I know we've gone over this a couple times with the group already. So I included a couple photos from our site visits. We've been all over the county. We've done 29 of 30 site visits. We have one more, the Pacifica Nursing and Rehab Center, next week. So it's been a couple busy weeks, but it's been really fun, and it's been great to get to know some of you better and to really see behind the scenes on how flood control and how some of these critical facilities work in the county. So we're definitely learning a lot about how important electricity is to our operations of facilities and our pump stations, and really looking at where that source of electricity is coming in and whether that is vulnerable to flooding. So a lot of times there's generators, but if the generators don't have access to electricity, then you could have problems. So I think it'll be really important to think about resilience in general, and if we have cut off of electricity, do we have own localized sources and so forth. We're also learning. I'm new to the county, so I didn't realize how high the groundwater table actually is. A lot of people are talking about, they're going in to do a little, some maintenance, digging a hole, and it just fills up with water. Or at San Mateo Island, actually, Michelle and I learned that at high tide, you start to see water kind of coming through the cracks. So that's something I didn't realize. I think what we're learning is that in some areas, we don't even need to really think about sea level rise. We have a lot to do right now to think about flooding, groundwater, erosion right now. So it's been extremely valuable. So thank you all for your time. I'm excited to share all the vulnerability profiles with you in June. So a brief shout out, Earth Day, April's Earth Day month. The county, we have lots of our sustainability staff, including TJ and me, that will be at tables. I think almost every city in the county has an Earth Day event, and we'll be staffing tables at most of those events. So you can go to our RecycleWorks website, which is hyperlinked in this presentation, and we'll have this up online to see where we'll be. So now, are there any questions on where we are with the vulnerability assessment? Great. So what I wanted to do next, and we'll use the microphone to the best we can, is first we'll talk about what kind of efforts do you already have going on in your city. I think it would be helpful for everyone to know what people are working on, and then we can start thinking, are people doing the same things? Are there similar questions that are coming up as you all think about how to incorporate sea level rise into projects and so forth? And then the next piece is, have you thought about how you want to use the results of the vulnerability assessments that are coming out? And what would be the best way for you to take that data? So we've been typing up our work next steps, and we want to make sure that it incorporates your needs for using this information and for coming up with some coordinated adaptation strategies. So some of these questions are, how do you best use the data? As Chris mentioned, there's really rich GIS data that's coming out of the study or that partners and agencies are developing. And we want to be able to serve that up to you and want to know, is it useful if it's, download this GIS layer and you open that up in your actual GIS system? Is that what you use? Or do you want to have it in an actual viewer without using the actual GIS capabilities? So there are options for different viewers where you can overlay the FEMA maps with the AECOM, with the the maps we showed today, with OCOP, and kind of see how the different maps put together. And then we can bring up all of our assets, and you can be able to see what we're coming up with on the vulnerability assessment in an online viewer. We for sure will have it all in GIS, but we want to see how do you best access information. And yeah, so these questions are there. I think we'll start with what I wanted to do was just go around for each entity. If you could talk about what you're currently doing to address sea level rise, if you have any current or completed projects, and if you have any policy updates, general plans, LCPs in the works. Great, we'll just use the microphone if we can.
Great, thank you. I have a question for you all. At the City of Menlo Park, we're currently in the process of updating our general plan, and we've been thinking about sea level rise a lot and doing research on what other agencies around the country are doing. San Francisco, so two things. San Francisco has delineated a sea level rise vulnerability zone, and they've used 66 inches and the 100-year event. We in Menlo Park are trying to figure out how we should be delineating that and what requirements we should be implementing in terms of development, in terms of having buildings, the first floor elevation to be at a certain level, whether that will be 20. We're currently considering 24 inches. So I'm wondering if other cities are thinking about this, because it would be helpful to be consistent throughout the county.
So from River City, one of the current projects that we have accounted for sea level rise is Blue Harbor. 3 feet of sea level high water. That's already in progress right now. And we're also doing in our updated harbor specific plan, using the same 3 feet for sea level rise in centuries. That's something we're planning for. The question was how would you like to use the data? River City has a pretty useful tool, so we have other facing side and want to present that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's something you can consider. It's helpful that we're also using the same parcel fabric that the county.
You'd be able to pretty easily just serve it up into your the city portal.
Yeah.
Great.
Jeff Monetta with Foster City. We are currently working with our consultant Chef and Wheeler on the design of our levee to raise it. So based on that, we are working on the environmental impact report. We completed the geotechnical investigation, and we're working on the preliminary design. We have 2 community meetings scheduled for one next week, April 21st. So that's for the residents of Foster City, and then we have another one on May 12th, which is targeted towards the business, since they will be impacted as well. All properties in Foster City are impacted by the project. We've also prepared a frequently asked questions video, so that's available. It's on our website, it's on YouTube, so the residents, if they can't attend the meeting, then they can go to the YouTube video and check that out. We'll be running video on the community meetings as well, so if residents or businesses can't attend, then they can watch it online. Thank you.
John Bouchard with the South Bay Salt Pond Restoration Project.
concentrating on is about 3,000 acres in the Ravenswood area. That's right around the Dumbarton Bridge, and sea level rise is pretty central to our planning process. And our goals are one, habitat, and two, another major goal for us is to have these wetlands help serve as a part of a more resilient shoreline. So we're integrating habitat features in there that will hopefully make resilient as part of a shoreline solution. As far as usefulness, I could speak for the Don Edwards Refuge. When they inherited these salt ponds, they inherited over 70 miles of quote-unquote levees. So looking at that weak link analysis, I mean, we've developed levee maintenance plans with them, but having that online viewer tool to help see where those weak links are and where low spots might pose the most risk can help focus their levee maintenance efforts.
Hi, I'm Sabrina Brennan, and I just wanted to mention that the San Mateo County Harbor District is hosting a site visit at Oyster Point Marina, which is going to be on April 25th at 5:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. The purpose of the site visit is to check out the various facilities at Oyster Point Marina Park, and also look at some of the chronic flooding issues related to landfill subsidence and sea level rise. So we've got sort of an interesting situation going on at Oyster Point, where at this time it appears that the subsidence is sort of the greater factor, but sea level rise is also an influence on the flooding that's happening. And if you want to see the future of sea level rise, Oyster Point is a really good place to check it out, because flooding happens there on a regular basis at high tides and also during king tide, to the extent that some buildings are inaccessible, parking areas are inaccessible, and it's a pretty extreme situation. So it's interesting. So anyway, the site visit's open to the public, and anyone's welcome to join. Thank you.
Action Street, City of Belmont. We are also in process of updating our general plan. So part of our strategy is waiting for data sets that's going to come out of this study to incorporate that information into our strategies in the general plan. The other aspect, as far as the GIS layer, we would like for the city would like to receive the data. We kind of have a pretty robust GIS system that we can use for our purposes.
Hey, good morning. Once again, Brian Schumacher, South San Francisco, San Bruno Water Quality Control Plan. One thing that we're doing is we're concentrating more at ground level for data sets. To that, we've resurrected we're in the process of resurrecting a gauging station that exists on Culver Creek for stage high level during high tides and storm events for storm surface, partnering with FEMA to get that information on the website. So we are participating for others. FEMA expressed that San Mateo County gauging station on the creek, so working towards that. Regarding output of the data, we'd like to see more of a universal file format for that's because many of the discussions that we partake in a group setting with others, sometimes internet access is limited. Maybe like a Google Earth, AMD, or whatever the Google file. Thank you.
How much was the gauge update?
Regarding the cost of the gauge update, we're probably looking at about $6,800.
Okay.
This is Jill with the City of Half Moon Bay again, and I've already
mentioned that we are putting out our sea level rise vulnerability assessment. It's actually going to be conveyed tonight to our General Plan Advisory Committee. So it's our first public review draft. We could expect to get some comments on that. But for the context, the city is updating their general plan as well as the local coastal program. The city of Half Moon Bay is located entirely within the coastal zone, so the emphasis right at this point is on the local coastal land use plan. We have a meeting on April 28th where we will convey our first public review draft of that document. It includes a coastal hazard chapter, which incorporates our first take at sea level rise policies, and many of those are, well, all of them are a component of the guidance from the Coastal Commission that came out in August on their sea level rise policy document. That document is really wide-ranging because it covers the entire coast. So Half Moon Bay's focus is primarily on our bluff condition and all the drainages that we have. So it's a really interesting chunk of that shoreline, but many of the policy recommendations don't apply to our type of coastline. So we've been trying to cull that out and use that document, and I think we're one of the early cities to be doing that, so we're learning a lot. A couple more things. Just during this time when we've been developing our study, we've had all kinds of things happen on the shoreline very actively this winter, and also coordinated with the county with the erosion at Marauder Road. We have some drainages that have caused really accelerated erosion in some of our bluff top areas. We have a bridge over a Seymour, the Seymour drainage that the drainage has been incising and expected slip erosion there as well. So whether or not sea level rise is part of this, there's very current practice of how to adapt in real time or deal with it in real time. And I think it's a great lesson to sort of note how powerful it is and how much better it would be to plan very far ahead. I think a hallmark of Half Moon Bay's plan will be highlighting the significance of moving the coastal trail back from the bluff line in places where it appears to be vulnerable. It's really the most iconic feature that we have in our town, as well as probably along the coast. So it's interesting, it's exciting, and it's rather stressful. A couple more things. The Half Moon Bay Sea Level Rise Vulnerability Assessment will be posted online. You'll be able to take a look at what we did. It's not a big wow document because we're just using existing, all the best science that's available. Best available data from OCOS, from USGS, and all the other sources. But it is compiled into one document really for the first time for our town, and so it really becomes a playbook of what we need to do next. And we also chose, in coordination with the county as well as the Coastal Commission, we deliberately chose nearer-term scenarios so that we could most actively plan for things that are going to happen soon, that we could expect to occur in the near term, knowing that the county has the 6.5-foot scenario as well. So we are both enjoying having the support from different grant funds, and we think we have this extended range of forecast for our coastline because we've not overlapped our scenarios. Sort of step them apart from each other. So those are just a few things. We'll see how it goes. Our community is incredibly well educated about this. They're very interested, and they are sure to give us plenty of feedback. I don't know. Is anybody from San Mateo County Park here or on the webinar? I don't think so. Okay. Well, I'll just mention a project they're working on, and I don't have a great level of detail, but at Coyote Point County Park,
They are doing the promenade project, and that part's finished. It was the eastern and western except. They finished the western promenade, and now they're working towards implementing work at the eastern promenade. So this is the beach at Coyote Point Park. And I don't know that they are calling it a managed retreat project, but it is basically a managed retreat project, and it's kind of exciting. There's been a lot of erosion there. We're going to step back the promenade, create a perched beach, and put in, features to address the current erosion and take into account sea level rise. So the project is moving towards construction relatively.
Can you talk about that's the other side, the harbor, the oyster? Okay. Kelly, you know?
So on the other side of the beach, that Amy mentioned, there, the Living Shorelines project is testing plat sites for potential oyster and eelgrass restoration. So we're not sure anything's going to happen there yet, but it has been chosen as a test site. And so there are going to be more test plots out there. So there's a lot happening at Coyote Point.
Caltrans?
Dictate from the Caltrans district office here in Oakland. We're responsible for the 19 Bay area, but there is an effort going on, a statewide effort. I'm not directly involved. Our office of regional planning and headquarters is doing statewide vulnerability assessment. They contracted with Parsons Winterhoff to do a district by district assessment. There's 12 districts in the state, 12 districts. Our district is one of the first done. They're going to look at a variety of time pressures, not just certainly civil rights. They'll also be looking at river flooding, wildfire, storm as well. So if you can imagine, you're not going to get the level of detail that this kind of, but it will give us the first time district, and also I should mention it's only looking at but what it will give us is something that my executive management want, a way to prioritize where vulnerabilities are district-wide. We've been involved in, as mentioned, the big certain spot locations. So we don't have this overall picture of where. So I think, although I said it may not provide the level of detail, I think what it will help us do is give us a starting point where we can engage with local people to start looking at adaptation for people. Hopefully have a lot better. And then to answer your question, Hillary, about the output, like the GIS file, online map, PDF. Maps, I would say all three would be great. The online map, and I think PDS would be great for also GIS. GIS that provide any other information.
Great. For different levels of users. Yeah. You want to give an update?
Dick, thanks for the update on it. One of my big things involved in this, like borrow with Dave Blanchard, again, talking GIS data, we're happy to share, but one thing we found is that sometimes it's limited, so more cross-pollination, like that, I you sent over your bridge maps to us, which is great. So if you are doing studies in your jurisdiction that has key assets, and if you're able to share them with the county, we'd appreciate it as well. I think we all need to build up our GIS data set as we're doing these studies. So we are across the city got data that you're able to share with us.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So we have 2 minutes left. Any questions? I guess any other topics that you have been thinking, oh my gosh, if I just had this, it would help my field rights efforts. I think that will really help us as we think about, what kind of grants to pursue, what kind of efforts that we want to do.
So I know that, that the county's put together a list of, I don't know how many assets altogether that are potentially jeopardized. 100,000?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's a lot to consider. I'm wondering if there, and maybe you've already done this and I'm just not aware of it, but if there was a way to maybe color code or prioritize things based on whether they're currently experiencing problems with sea level rise. Like, for example, Oyster Point Marina would fall into that category, and maybe Coyote Point, I'm not sure. But places that are currently having flooding problems, and then sort of color coding to like the least critical to the most critical as far as impacts or concerns, so that we could start to prioritize efforts around most critically in need locations.
Yeah, so great question. We will be doing a lot of that as part of the vulnerability assessment. Arcadis has categorized the built assets into whether there's risk to human life and safety. So that is essentially kind of, here's something that's a critical facility, would be the greatest risk. If it's not a critical facility, it's lower risk. But we also have natural habitats and social vulnerable communities, another category. So that sort of categorization will be in the report. In terms of what's at risk today, that's generally what falls into the 12 inches scenario. And there are only a few places, actually on the bay and coast side. So I think it will be really, our scenarios are higher, so our baseline scenario is the 100-year storm. But I do think it's important to note in the report what floods today at a high tide, or what the foot is over. So we'll make note of that in the report. Great suggestion. So yeah, actually I was going to mention this, and then we got sidetracked. So we have Aiden Coutet on the webinar from the Planning Commission of Woodside, and she wanted everyone to know that the Woodside General Plan, updated in 2012, includes a sustainability element that has a lot of greenhouse gas mitigation measures, so that they're also working on climate change efforts. Great, yeah.
Just comment, kind of taking off on the data set issues and efforts that's going on with the county. I'm sure you know Matt Fabry with the CCAG Stormwater Group.
Yeah.
We are kind of engaging in the process of green infrastructure planning for the county, along with reasonable assurance analysis, which is kind of taking into account kind of projects from a stormwater perspective that would kind of identify sites for water retention and treatment purposes. I think that's something that probably would have some overlaying relationship with this effort as well.
Yeah.
It's probably good to bring that into the conversation. If you haven't already kind of touch base with Matt on that.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, and we've been coordinating with Matt, and Danielle, our Deputy Director for Sustainability, has been going to both the Silver Edge meetings and the Green Infrastructure meetings to really be able to combine the two, because they're both related to water. All right, thank you all for coming. I'll be here, I'll stick around if anybody has any additional questions. I really appreciate your time this morning. And thank you all on the webinar for joining.